I got a notification that the recording started, so
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
like
it's being
few
recorded to
minutes
the
ago.
cloud. Yeah, okay, great.
okay.
All right, so it'll be recorded. That's good. I think that AI also thought it was being recorded too. So as to Rita's point, so it is now officially being recorded. So I didn't screw that up. Okay, so again, let me welcome you. Uh, I will turn it over to the team. I think Rita's going to start. Is that correct?
Mhm. Yeah,
Isaac,
I am starting.
Isaac, you do the first slide and I do the second, right?
Perfect.
Just
Okay, go for it.
okay.
Let's start.
Yeah, you can start, Isaac.
Perfect. So, hi everyone. Thank you very much to invite us, Jane, to be involved in this journal club. For us, it's a pleasure to present our work. This is a very well international team-based research that started 5 years ago with the proposal of Rita, who just made all of us to be motivated in trying to discover or to explore how people learn to cycle. So the title of the study we are presenting and discussing today is how learning to cycle influences lifestyle. This is a 8 country pool analysis and based on a person-centered approach. So the structure will be divided in three main parts. The first part will be the introduction that Rita will develop. I will continue with the methods and the results. And finally, Anne will explain the discussion we developed for the manuscript. So, Rita, if you would like, we can continue.
Yes, just second slide.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so learning to cycle is an important motor milestone, and it's often considered to be a foundational movement skill because it may have important implications in physical activity levels across lifespan. So cycling has several benefits. It promotes outdoor physical activity, it helps to reduce sedentary behavior, it supports children's independent mobility, it has physical benefits such as improved cardiovascular health, social benefits, because when children go cycling, they can do it with their family or with their friends. Emotional benefits, because it involves overcoming a challenge. And it also supports multiple sustainable development goals, so like promoting health, sustainable cities, quality education, climate action. So more broadly, cycling plays a key role in promoting individual health, community health, and planetary health. So you can pass to the next slide. The process of learning to cycle has been framed or can be framed within Bronfenbrenner's bioecological theory, which views development as the result of the interactions between the child and multiple systems that shape everyday life. And at the most proximal level, we find the microsystem, which includes settings such as the family and the peer group, and the extent to which the family and the peer group are available to encourage, support, and facilitate the process of learning may influence if the child learns how to cycle earlier or later. After the microsystem, we have the mesosystem, which refers to the relationship between the different microsystems in the child's life. So these links are important. For instance, if the relationship between the family and the child peers is positive, and if it's trusting, parents will probably be more willing to allow the child to ride a bicycle with friends. After, we have the exosystem, which is next slide. And the exosystem refers to settings in which the child is not directly involved, but which may still affect the development. For instance, parents' work conditions influences whether they have the time, the resources, the flexibility to buy a bicycle, and the flexibility to take the child to cycling in safe places, for instance. So although the child is not an active participant in the parent's work, this still shapes the learning process in meaningful ways. After this, we have the macro system. The macro system refers to the broader social, political, cultural context in which the child lives. So from this perspective, it's the country where the child lives and the value that that country places on cycling, on active mobility, if it has or it doesn't have safety conditions for riding a bicycle. This also seems probably will influence the age at which children learn how to cycle. And finally, the chrono system, which is the historical period in which the child is born is captured by the chrono system. So this relates to the importance given to cycling and to active mobility at a particular point in time. And other aspects such as the type of bicycles available for children to learn how to cycle also differ in different points of time. So in this sense, both the social changes and the technological changes shape how and when children will learn how to cycle independently. So when we decided to study the process of learning to cycle, we began by focusing on the macro system and on the chrono system. More specifically, we wanted to understand whether the country where a person lives and the generation into which they are born influence the age at which they achieve the milestone of learning to cycle independently. And to address this question, we conducted an online survey across several countries. And you can click 3 more times, Isaac, to appear the, okay.
Sorry.
No problem. We had lots of ideas, but we had no funding. But I have lots of crazy friends around the world, and they were willing to work for free, which was great. So we gathered a big team, as you can see by the number of authors in this first paper that you can see here. And for the first study, we had a sample of 9,589 participants from 10 countries. And we examined the generational differences in the age of independent cycling. Participants were grouped by birth year into 3 20-year periods corresponding roughly to generations X, Y, and Z. The survey took about 5 to 15 minutes to complete. It was an anonymous survey and included questions about participants' own cycling experiences and, when applicable, the cycling experiences of their oldest and youngest child. So you can pass to the next one. And our results showed that the country of residence significantly influenced the age at which we learn how to cycle independently. So broadly speaking, the participants' countries can be grouped in 3 clusters. You can click 3 times. Okay, so group 1, Netherlands, Finland, and Belgium. Group 2, Italy, UK, Croatia, Spain, and Portugal. And group 3, Latin America, Brazil, and Mexico. So these differences in the age where children learn to cycle in different countries suggest that geographical, social, and cultural and political factors may shape the role that cycling has in children's lives. This is also probably really related to the characteristics of the built environment, which make some places more or less supportive to learning how to cycle. Interestingly, the pattern that we got here reflects really well the cycling model share of each country. So in countries where everyone rides a bicycle, children learn to cycle really early. In countries where bicycle is not a really common mode of transportation, children learn to cycle much later in life. So you can pass. And in regards to the chrono system, what we saw is there was also a main effect of the generation in the age of learning to cycle. So overall, younger generations learn to cycle earlier than older generations. For example, Generation X learned later than Generation Z. And this probably reflects lower access to bicycles in earlier decades and less shared leisure time between parents and children. And across generations, bicycle design has also changed, and bicycles today are more child-friendly. And most children have a bicycle appropriate scaled to their body size when they're learning. And after the turn of the millennium, we observed a further decline in learning age, which is probably related not only to a more central role of cycling within the family life, but also to the transition of the learning process from training with training wheels, of the learning process from training wheels to balance bikes. So this was our first approach to the process of learning to cycle in the first article. But of course, that we expected that in such a big, great group of crazy people, new perspectives would emerge on this topic. And that's what Isaac did. And he will be presenting the next slides where we took a different approach to this problem.
Thank
So
you,
the floor
Rita.
is yours, Isaac.
As Rita mentioned, instead of focusing our approach on a variable center manner, that means whether the mean value of a variable go up or down, we would like to explore whether different groups of people exist in our core. So this is why we use or we follow a person-centered approach, because it's the best way to just capture the individual's heterogeneity, to identify those who are who has similar values and combine in a similar manner in the whole sample size. There are different techniques to analyze the data, and we use the self-organizing maps. I will explain later. The positive side of these person-centered approaches is that it can provide more accurate information for future interventions or to support policymakers in terms of the developing infrastructure for helping our citizen to cycle every day. So with this approach in mind, we would like to identify such several clusters according to the individual's cycling habits and behavior. So the fact of using the person-centered approach allow us also to explore thoroughly and try to understand appropriately how we can promote cycling around the countries that were involved. So as Rita mentioned, the Learning to Cycle project involved around 10,000 people, but for the current study, we only include countries who have more than 300 answers. Of course, we have the adults. The online survey was conducted by all adults, but those who have children also responded according to their children. So at the end, the mean age of our sample in this study is around 29 years, with almost 60% of the sample being women. The instrument, the survey uses, as Rita mentioned, different questions. The process of learning was related to the type of bikes we use, like balance bike, bikes with two or one wheel, the conventional one. So we try to include as many aspects as possible to for later to explore the association between these options thoroughly. For instance, in the case of who teach the individuals for learning to cycle. We have the mom, the dad, both friends, another member of the family, sport clubs, and so on. But also in terms of cycling habits, we have the reason why people cycle for leisure or daily mobility, and when they cycle. For instance, if we are thinking in some countries, the difference of temperature in winter and summer, it's dramatic. So having such information, we consider we will be able to describe different profiles. So in order to combine all the data, we apply what is called self-organizing maps. This is a technique that would be considered appropriate to explore the profiles, because being a non-supervised technique where the data are organized according to its nature, there is no researchers computing the amount of profiles that we would like to establish. Then it's like it provides less odds of bias, but at the same time, the structure is also self-organized. So according to the data values, the network is adapting and it's repeating several times for getting the best answer. I will explain the three phases slightly. But at the same time, this technique is well prepared for those data who has non-linear patterns, and also that could be complex in terms of combining to each other. So, and it is also important to know that the larger the sample and the higher the amount of variables, the more powerful is the outcome. So we adopt self-organizing maps that, in order to build the network, it is we have to conduct three different phases. The first phase is starting to build the network, and we must reduce the dimension of the data space by adjusting or standardizing the values in order to control the way the different ranges and nature of the variables, to make them to don't impact more than other variables what is the construction of the network. After this standardization, we try to create the network in terms of making the system to establish a specific topology. I mean, we define the rectangular with shape with different hexagons. An hexagon means a neuron, and a neuron, it's like a set of individuals that are combined or they share similar characteristics. So in order to find these individuals who share commonalities, what we do is the initialization. It means that we in the system includes individual and check whether the value in each input variable is similar or not according to the whole data set we are having. So each individual has a weight, and as we are including the individuals in the system, the weight is building all the lattice. Once we have the initialization process and the system is stable, then we move to the network training. It repeats the process. I think it's 100 times per input variable. So we have around or almost 1,500 repetitions. And the reason is for the system to establish how every neuron change according to the input variables. The similar some individuals are in the same neuron, the closest will be with all individuals with not exactly the same values, but similar in terms of input variables, but also, or the contrary, the farther away the neuron from the one in which are located the individuals, the less connection or less similar will be. So finally, the self-organizing map represent the complex and high dimension data set in the network, and it involves groups of individuals that will allow us to establish mini profiles. But the problem in this case is that if we, for instance, this is the component plane. If we choose each neuron as a profile, then we will have too many profiles and would be very difficult to explain the characteristics of them. So what we do is to apply coming clustering in order to group them in what we could consider a feasible amount of profiles that describe commonalities in each of them. So, and we establish them according to the Davis-Baldwin index. The lowest the index value, the more reliable would be the amount of profiles we choose. So once we have these profiles, then we compare the input and the outcomes we have outside the box of the input variables to try to understand what are the characteristics the individuals have within the same profile compared to the rest of the participants. So here you have how we represent the two-dimensional description. In our study, we found 7 profiles. The level A represent all the input variables we include in the study to analyze the data, like the age individuals learn to bike, the cycling frequency across the seasons, why they cycle every day, the bikes they used it years ago for learning to cycle, and who helped them to learn. As you can see, the Davis-Baldwin index established the 7, and just for instance, to describe some of them, the cluster 2 that is located in the upper right of the image represents those individuals who learn around 7-8 years old, where they learn the later. They use a conventional, mainly a conventional bicycle to learn, and were taught by their father, their mom, or both. And at the moment we conduct the survey, they use the bike for leisure. But if we go to the opposite side, the cluster, they learn being the youngest, where is the profile 5. They use a wide variety of bicycles without a specific people who touch them to learn, and they cycle for mobility mainly. If in order to understand how we know all of these characteristics, the the input variable description in each of the networks, it's established in a continuous manner. The yellow color will represent the highest value in the variable, and the blue color represent the minimum value. So according to the component plane that is in the level C, we can see that there are like different neurons that has a green shadow, and the higher the green shadow, the larger the amount of people in the neuron. So at the end, the system just establish the connection between different neurons involving the individuals that has such similarities. Once we have the component planes, what we do is just traditional comparisons. In our study, we just conduct a ANOVA or Kruskal Wallis according to the normality of the variables, or in the case of categorical one, the chi-square. For instance, if we keep focus on the cluster 5, these are those who cycle the more in summer and winter, in a similar age than the cluster 6 and 7. But if we focus in the center of the screen, they are part of the cluster or members of the cluster who cycle for mobility. This is clear. So we compare every of the group of the input variables, and as you can see, there are, like in the right side, different or a diversity of the options they use in terms of the type of bicycle and who teach them. Oops, sorry. Okay, good. Here, if we come back to the cluster 2, they don't use many of the bicycles, and it seems that only the conventional one was the one they use it. And according to the geographical origin of the individuals who are in each of the cluster 5 was characterized mainly for individuals from Finland. So we all know that, as Rita mentioned previously, Finland, Belgium, the Netherlands are countries where cycling is an important part of commuting. So in this profile, Finland was the one who represent the country with as main characteristic. So having all these results, we try to understand and to provide such guidelines or suggestion for our policymakers and the science. So it's Anne who are going to be discussing these findings.
All right, thank you, Isaac. And you can skip to the next slide. And thank you for clarifying the very sophisticated analysis. So I'm going to try to provide some clarity in what those fancy analysis really mean. But the overall message of what we did is that cycling habits across the lifespan are shaped by both early learning experiences and then the broader environmental and social factors. So it's not just one or the other, it's the interaction between both. So first, the study shows that a strong relationship between the age of learning and then later cycling engagement. So participants who learned to cycle earlier, so around 4 or 5 years old, were much more likely to cycle frequently as adults, including for transport and for commuting. In contrast, those who learned later, around 6 or 7 years old, they tended to cycle less or even not at all later on in life. So this suggests that early acquisition may play an important role in building confidence and skill development as well as long-term habits. And although our study shows that learning to cycle earlier on in life is associated with higher cycling engagement later in life, it is important to emphasize that this is not purely an individual effect. So just knowing how to cycle is not enough. The relationship between learning and then long-term cycling behavior is strongly shaped by the environment that people grow up in and then ultimately live in. So, for example, our study found clear differences between different countries. So participants from Finland, as mentioned earlier, this is a place where cycling infrastructure is very well developed and cycling is socially supported. Those people from Finland were much more likely to be frequent cyclists. And then in contrast, participants from countries like Brazil and Mexico were more often in the low cycling clusters that we found. So this suggests that even if individuals learn to cycle early, they may not continue to do so if their environment does not support it, whether it's due to safety concerns, a lack of bike lanes, long commuting distances, or even cultural norms that don't really encourage cycling. So cycling behavior emerges from an interaction between, first of all, the individual skills, then the opportunities to use those skills, and finally, the broader physical and social environment. So in other words, cycling is a skill multiplied by the opportunity and the environment. If any of these components are missing, then long-term cycling engagement is less likely. So although our study shows, although this what we just said actually fits well within our bioecological framework that we used in the study. So as Rita explained, behavior is influenced by multiple interacting levels, going from the individual to then the broader environment. So at the individual level, factors like the age at which we learn to cycle and our skill development are really important. And at the social level, influences include parents, peers, and then the support that people receive when they are learning to ride a bike. So for example, whether someone is encouraged to cycle or has friends to cycle with can shape their confidence and motivation to cycle. And then at the environmental level, we have factors like infrastructure, urban design, safety, and cycling culture. And those determine whether cycling is actually a practical and attractive option in daily life. So what's important here is that these levels don't act independently. They interact with each other over time. So for example, a child may learn to cycle at the individual level and be supported by their parents at the social level, but still not become a regular cyclist if they live in a city with poor infrastructure, so at the environmental level. So on the other hand, even moderate skills, so people that aren't really that good at cycling, they can ultimately still achieve high cycling engagement if the environment that they live in strongly supports it. So the key idea is really that cycling behavior develops over time through the interaction between the person and the context, rather than being driven by one single factor. And this helps explain why we see such different cycling patterns across the different clusters in our study. So our study also explored how people learn to cycle, and interestingly, there was no simple dominant pathway. So most people actually used a mix of bicycle types and were taught by different individuals, but especially their parents. So there is some support for the idea that balance bikes may promote earlier learning, but the findings were mixed. So this is not like one true fact for everybody. So this again suggests that's what matters more than the specific method is the access to the opportunities to practice and then a supportive learning environment. So rather than just focusing on one best way or one specific bike to teach kids how to cycle, interventions may benefit from being flexible and more context specific. So these findings are important because they show us that cycling behavior, it's not just something that people decide later in life. It is actually shaped much earlier. And these early learning experiences then appear to influence confidence and cycling habits, the development of motor skills, and then the formation of those long-term habits. So the early factors can carry through into adulthood and influence whether someone chooses to cycle regularly. And this then has broader implications beyond just cycling. It affects people's overall physical activity levels, long-term health outcomes, and even how people choose to go from one place to another, whether or not they use their bikes for active commuting. So an important point here is that behaviors established early are generally more stable over time. So if cycling is not adopted early, it can be much harder to introduce later in life. And this helps explain why some of the clusters in our study show very low cycling engagement despite people having learned the skill. So overall, this kind of highlights the importance of early life stages as a critical window to develop those lifelong active behaviors. So building on that information, the findings of our study have clear implications for policy and practice. So first, from a policy perspective, promoting cycling should not just focus only on infrastructure, even though that's important, but also on early life interventions. So this includes encouraging children to learn to cycle as young as possible, ideally before the age of 5, when skill development and habit formation are most effective in general. And then second, in terms of education, schools and childcare settings are key environments to focus on this. So children spend a large amount of time in those settings. So it's the perfect opportunity to teach them how to cycle and create positive experiences and normalize cycling as a part of everyday life. And then third, there are important implications for public health as well as sustainability. So encouraging cycling from an early age can actually contribute to increased physical activity levels, a reduced risk of chronic diseases, and then more sustainable transport systems. Rather than always using the car, people may be more willing to use their bikes. However, and this is a crucial point, these strategies can only be effective if they are combined with safe and supportive environments. So if the infrastructure is lacking or if cycling is perceived as unsafe or inconvenient, then even people who have the skills may not actually cycle. So for example, when I'm in Belgium, I use my bike all the time when I go visit my family and my friends, simply because most streets have bike lanes and people driving in their cars are actually used to sharing the road. But when I'm here in South Carolina, especially where I live, which is a little more in the country, there's hardly any bike lanes and drivers actually freak out when they see bikers. Like it's like they don't know what to do with it. They either give me no space whatsoever or they move all the way to the other lane, which is kind of weird too. So I hardly ever ride my bike here. It's just not a safe thing to do. So I think the key message here is that you need to combine early skill development with supportive environments to create those lasting changes in cycling behavior. And then, of course, like most research projects, our study had some what we think are considerable strengths, but also a few important limitations. In terms of strengths, we think that the large international sample was a huge advantage, and it increases the relevance of our findings across different contexts. And then the use of the very complicated and well-explained analysis, thank you for that, Isaac, of the person-centered analysis helped us to capture real-world complexity better than just the traditional methods that we often use when just looking at a variable-centered approach. And then also very important, our study links the learning processes with adult behaviors, which is something that hasn't been studied much before. So this is something that we added to what was already known about this topic. And even though we're very happy with our results, we have to acknowledge that there were also some limitations, with the biggest one being that we relied on retrospective self-report data. So there's a possibility of recall bias, with participants possibly not accurately remembering when or how they learned to cycle. But as you could see in the methods section, there weren't many people that indicated that they didn't remember at all. Another limitation is that it's cross-sectional. So technically, we can't really establish causality. And then third, it's a convenience sample. So as Rita pointed out, she used all her crazy friends to contact their crazy friends and family and acquaintances. And that's how we got this big sample, which may limit generalizability, as certain populations may be over or underrepresented. But I think if you have a sample of 9,000 people, I think it's safe to assume that they, at least to a certain point, are representative of a more global population. But it would be good for future research to use a longitudinal design and also include people that are not related to Rita in any way, to understand how cycling behavior develops over time. So to conclude, in a nutshell, I think this study allows us to say that early learning of cycling is very important, but it has to be supported by favorable environmental and social conditions. And then ultimately, promoting cycling requires a combined approach. So developing these skills early in life and then creating environments where cycling is accessible, culturally supported, and especially safe. So this integrated perspective is essential for promoting cycling as a lifelong behavior and as a sustainable mode of transport. Isaac, you get the honor to wrap it up.
Thank you, Rita and Anne, for supporting me in this journal club. You have done absolutely fine. Thank you, everyone. This is the study we conduct. As you can see in the authorship, we were many people working in the same project, and I think it reflects how it's the I-MDRC, a consortium of colleagues that working together can move the field forward in a beautiful manner. And being a part of such a tiny academic family, it's wonderful. So, Jane, thank you very much for inviting us to be involved in this project, and David, was a pleasure to receive your proposal.
It was David who found your paper. So, he's a guy that said, you need to do this paper. And once I started reading it, I went, yes, we should, definitely. However, I do want to make one major limitation you did not list, and that is there's nobody from the US of A here.
That's my fault because we started collecting.
She did know you, Anna.
I had just moved here and I unfortunately at the time didn't have the social circle that I have now. And I think we only collected data from maybe 50 people or something like that. So unfortunately, we didn't meet the 300 threshold.
Well, the problem I think with the US, it really depends on what town you live in.
Exactly.
As if you go to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, everybody rides a bike.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to Washington, D.C., maybe not so much, or to a big city. So as you said, where you are, probably in Columbia, maybe more people ride bikes than outside of it.
Correct. I live about 35 minutes away from Columbia, and I literally 2 years ago, I taught my at the time 7.5-year-old neighbor how to ride his bike. And I'm thinking honestly, if I hadn't, he may still not be able to do it. And now he loves it. He literally rings my doorbell to ask me to go ride bikes with him. So
That's great. Well, Rita obviously needs more friends in the United States.
She was my representative at the time, but yes, of
There, no, that's great. No, I think that was very interesting. I do have a question. The other day in my neighborhood, we have a lot of bikers. I live in a town called Annapolis. It's the state capital in Maryland. It's about 35, 40 miles from Washington, D.C. And there's a naval academy here. And so it's, got a lot of people who ride bikes. And they have these 50-mile bike rides, and they come through our neighborhood. Well, some of my neighbors got a little bent out of shape about all these bikers coming in. So a guy came to talk to our community about the bikes, and he made an interesting point, and that is the increase in the number of motorized bikes. So now we're not talking about just an e-bike, but there's sort of not a motorcycle, and they're not the scooters, but they're kind of a small little bike, but has a motor on them. And he said these are really gaining in prevalence. And I wondered if you've thought about how that's going to influence, because kids are not exercising when they're riding a motorized bike. The motor is doing all the work.
If I can speak to that, I agree with the ones where it's 100% the motor doing the work. But I actually changed my opinions about the e-bikes. I used to think the same way. I was like, oh, people are going to be less active. But what I see in Belgium is that a lot of people use their bikes more because they have some assistance, but you still got to put some work in. Like my mom, who's now 71, uses her electric bike to go everywhere. And there's 6 different settings, and typically she'll put it on one. And like the doctor had told her for her heart, she's not allowed to ride a bike uphill unless it's with support. So this actually allows her to be more active.
Yeah.
So
I think that's exactly, and that's how I see it. I saw a lot of my friends who I'm in that same age range as your mother, is that people started getting e-bikes because up to that point, as soon as they saw a hill, they went, no, I can't ride this bike. Exactly. And so as opposed to the motorized bikes, which are different.
Yeah.
But e-bikes as an assisted device. Yeah.
I also think that it can be also impacted by the individual's motivation in terms of using the motorbikes, in terms of people who think are not going to be able to go up hill, but having such support, they can feel under pressure, and it makes them to keep cycling, regardless the age and the environment. Also, for those who have some meetings at work, some colleague of mine use the motorbike because they don't like to be wet when they arrive in the offices. So
okay, right, sweating. They don't want to sweat.
it could be good, but at the same time, it could make a good young people to don't effort themselves.
Right. Well, so before I ask anybody else's question, the other question I had was, it's interesting to me, at least in the United States, that preschools don't teach bike riding. We were talking with David's work on swimming. There are a lot of schools will teach swimming, but I don't see, part of it must be safety, part of it might be the equipment, or why can't the kids bring their own bikes? But I don't see schools teaching bike riding. Is that true in Europe as well?
Preschools don't. Actually, this used to be something parents taught their kids.
Right.
And now parents are not teaching it anymore, so schools are feeling they have to do it. And in Portugal, we had this learning to cycle program, sorry, but in primary schools, which I think it's way too late. It should be in preschools. Or it should be parents, actually. I'm all for parents teaching their kids how to ride a bicycle. But if it's in school, I think primary school, as it is in Portugal, it's too late. And then they teach them how to ride a bicycle in the schoolyard, not to go to school and to come back from school, because Portugal is not, in most parts, it's not bike friendly. We don't have cycling lanes. And so that's our big next step. We're trying to promote cycling trains and walking buses to school, and trying that kids who already know how to cycle start using cycling in their daily life and commuting to school.
Right.
So that's the first finance project I had in Portugal, is to promote that.
That's great.
It would be interesting to see if any countries actually include that in their PE standards or other standards, because I'm not aware of any countries where it's systematically a part of PE or any other topic. Like in Belgium, I know they do it like once a year. They'll have a day where they do something fun with bikes and teach
The
kids.
Wheels Day, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
we
but
have
it's
that.
not necessarily, it's not the way we teach swimming, which is every other week in Belgium. Cycling is not, but for the reason that Rita mentioned, a lot of kids already know how to do it. Like my nephew was 2.5 when he could ride a bike independently without support. And then he used the bike to go to school. So for a lot of kids, it's not relevant anymore.
Yeah.
And it's assumed that it's a skill that is learned outside of school.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'd say probably I don't know if this is true, David sees this in California, but I'd say in my neighborhood, it's the parents who are teaching their kids to ride
Mhm.
bikes.
Yeah.
But again, it's like how, again, on when you go back and you look at the competencies listed for what children should have in a physical education, the national standards,
Yeah, it's not
that's
included.
not in there.
No.
Not even close.
No.
Yeah, I think, and on your question too, Jane, about whether the children are learning in schools and so on, I think the preschools, most of the preschools that I'm familiar with, especially in our area, they just don't have the space to teach cycling. And then I think, as Anne pointed out, if you've got all sorts of individual differences in terms of skill level, that makes it incredibly difficult as well, because now you've got limited space, and now you've got some children who can ride, so who are presumably just going to ride during the instruction period, and other students who actually need instruction to help them learn to ride.
But it's
And
a
then, of
lot like
course,
swimming, and you need to be one-on-one too. So the teachers don't have enough.
yeah,
Not
Yeah.
really. With the balance bikes, I don't think you need to be one-on-one. We had an intervention study in Portugal where we were trying to figure out which one is the best way, the training wheels or the balance bike. And in 1 week, we put all the kids cycling.
On the balance bikes.
Half of the group was in balance bike, half of the group was in training wheels. 3 kids in the training wheels group did not learn in
Yeah.
1 week, but all the others, 1 week was enough.
They need to ban the training wheels because you learn all the wrong movements. You
Yes,
put
it's
this way and
true.
you go
You're not training balance. You
exactly.
can do everything and you don't fall. So it's
Yeah.
It
unrealistic.
actually slows down the learning process because you
Yeah.
don't learn how to keep your balance, which is the one
Yes.
major skill to learn when you ride a bike.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I also
Right.
I want to complain just a little bit about one more thing, and that's the generations. I think you need to include the baby boomers. Because
No.
I learned not on a small bike, but on a regular standard adult bike.
Wow.
But I was 6 years old. My father bought it at the hardware store, brought it home and said, "You'll learn to ride."
Wow.
Okay. No training wheels, just go.
We had some. We didn't. We only excluded them because they were not. We didn't have enough representativeness. Many countries had few baby boomers answering our survey. Yeah. So
Yes, but
we
all
did
of the lowlands ride bikes, adults, right?
Yeah.
I'm impressed, Jane, that you can remember
Oh,
when you learned to ride a bike.
Well,
I was wondering, I was going to ask you actually, Rita and Isaac and Anne, did you ask all the co-authors on the paper if
Yeah.
they remembered when they learned to ride a bike?
It's interesting that you asked that because my family filled it out, like my parents and my brother, and I had to ask my mom to I was like, how old was I? And how I remember seeing pictures, but I don't remember how exactly. I have some recollection of how we did it, and we didn't use the training wheels, but I wouldn't have been able to fill it out accurately, to be honest.
Yeah, because I'm
Actually,
thinking too, obviously, the earlier you potentially learn to ride, the more difficult it would be to recall
Yeah.
yeah.
when you actually learn to
True.
ride.
My email was in the bottom of the survey. So if you have any question or anything, and all the comments that I received saying, "You're crazy, girl. You think I'm an 80-year-old guy. You think I remember how did I learn how to cycle?" And they were all from the Netherlands or Norway or in Latin countries, everyone remembers because they learn when they were 5 or 6. When they learn when they're 2 or 3,
Right.
they reply to me saying,
Yeah.
this is really difficult.
How
So
about-
all
Yeah.
the emails I got were from the countries with a big cycling model share.
The good thing is, though, that people were allowed to fill it out for the people that they taught, right? Like for their children.
Yeah.
And a lot of them remember it's a significant moment. So a lot of parents remember
Right.
when and how they taught their children. So I think that part is accurate because it is a major milestone and a lot of
Right.
people's.
Yeah. Everybody in the family remembers it.
Yeah.
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 Exactly.
Interestingly enough, neither of my parents bicycled. So why my father decided I should get a bike, he saw this bike up in the community at one of these stores and brought it home and said I would learn to ride the bike. It's like, yikes.
That's amazing. This is not relevant, but my grandfather had a bike store.
Oh,
And my mom, when she was very young, she taught so many kids when they bought their first bike how to ride their bike. So I think my mom probably literally taught dozens and dozens of kids how to ride a bike.
Wow.
that's great.
This is a milestone.
Yeah, really. It looks like we've lost everybody but the rest of us. So this was a very good session, very interesting. I'm definitely going to go around and ask all my old friends when they learned to
That's
ride a bike. Because most of them still ride bikes, and most of them in my age group all have e-bikes. So
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to add one more thing before we go, Jane. Just piggybacking on your comment about the e-bikes and motorized bikes. Obviously, if children are using those, and if anybody's using those, they're not going to get the cardiovascular benefit of cycling. But I think we need to highlight all of the other benefits associated with just balancing on a bike. I mean, learning to balance one, and particularly now thinking about older adults, just the balance experience and the practice they get, even if it's an e-bike. On that, I think it has got to be invaluable, and I think the balance component is something to really emphasize. And the other component is, and this is, in line with my interest in travel broadens the mind. There've got to be implications for spatial cognition too. When you can travel long distances on a bike and you've got to navigate and do those sorts of things, that's got to play an important role in either developing or maintaining spatial cognition. So I think we need to look beyond the obvious. There's a cardiovascular benefit to cycling to school or work and so on, and think about all these other benefits as well that are associated with just being on something you need to balance.
yeah, and being outdoors. Remember, that's also important.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, riding a bike in a gym is just not going to work. I mean, you get the cardiovascular kick, but it's like so boring. It's like running on a treadmill.
Yeah.
It's a mental struggle for real.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Well, I want to thank your team, even though all of your team wasn't there, but it was great. A wonderful paper, very interesting. And I like the trio giving the talk. So and then as all Americans have to appreciate the fact that you are giving this in not your native tongue, which is always amazing to me.
Thank you, Jane.
So much.
Thank
Jane,
you.
for
Congratulations. And thank you for the suggestion about rotating this around to different nights. We'll talk about that.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Take care, all.
Have a good
Bye,
one,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great team.
Right.